Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the special finance meeting of November 12th, 2024. I acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of the Shannon and Saddle First Nations. The District of Metchosin is committed to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and we recognize, honor, and respect the presence of Indigenous peoples past, present, and future. Please be sure to have your cell phones turned off during the meeting. Committee, we have an agenda before us. Yes, Councillor Jeffrey.
Sorry, Councillor Johnson, I just wanted to mention and acknowledge that Mr. John Horgan passed away early this morning, and he died here in Victoria. And I think, as we all know, it was his third bout with cancer, and it's a sad day. I think anyone who met John Horgan knew him as you might not agree with his politics, but I think you understood that he was a sincere and genuine individual. And I saw him speak at Lance Caven's funeral last year, and that certainly, in spite of being sick, he came across just a big man in spirit, for sure. So yeah, it's going to be very much lost. So thank you. Just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. I didn't know that. My encounter was his very fun-loving and engaging personality at a jamboree out in Sioux Camp Bernard in 2019. He was just like one of the kids. Just absolutely loved being out there having fun with them. So thank you. Yeah, he was surely be missed.
Well, I'm not sure how many years he was at Metchosin Day, of course, being our MLA.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very strong representation here.
Always serving up at the London. That's right.
Yeah.
So committee, we have an agenda before you. Are there any additions? We do have some paints here this afternoon that we will put in here for comment after we've gone through the reports.
Who has amended?
Thank you. Moved by by Mayor Little, seconded by Councillor Epp. Thank you. And the public, you're welcome to speak at public participation. If there's anyone in the community that would like to speak, now is the time. Please state your name and the street in which you live. And when you speak at the mic, I ask that you be respectful as you present yourself to your council, the staff, and the visitors in the gallery this afternoon. Thank you.
Barb Sawatsky, Kabir Road. I guess first of all I want to say how much I enjoyed the reception yesterday, the Remembrance Day program. It was really well done. The kids were great. The fire department just looked spectacular in their blues. The one thing that did stand out, well, didn't stand out, but one little thing was the size of the wreath that Metchosin put down. I thought was very poor, especially when I saw that great big wreath that Sangster School brought out, and they're not even in Metchosin, and we had a dinky little wreath, and I thought perhaps if some of the funds from maybe the volunteer appreciation night could be taken out of that and put to something a little more spectacular next year, it would show that our priorities aren't completely skewed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Jim McPherson, Eagle Tree Place. First, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak. I followed CFO Creek's presentations to Council now all the way through this budget exercise, and can only tell you how incredibly impressed I have been with the information, with the cooperation, and with the assistance that he has given, hopefully to all of us, and I'm sure that's the case. What Mr. Creek paints for us, though, is a small community which is about to confront some extremely serious budget issues. Already, even though there may be some uncertainty about e-com, the real budget requirement for this coming year already shows an increase in taxes of about 10% over last year's tax bill for the average Metchosin residents. And many of this increase is consumed by areas which we cannot avoid, which have to be paid. We may not even have got to projects at this particular point, but it seems to me that there is no budget room for any projects unless they have been budgeted for this year and are going to be deferred to next year, or unless projects can be fully covered by grants. And in this fiscal environment, I have one question, and that is, how on earth do we pay for a new fire hall? Metchosin is a small community. Tax revenue is limited, and if we keep following the OCP, population growth and accompanying tax revenues are not going to increase all that much. They're going to be slow. Unless we find meaningful sources of revenue, funds will not be there for many projects. Metchosin has to live within its means. It simply cannot afford to live beyond them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? There will be a second opportunity for the public to speak after our discussions over the budget. Okay, so we'll move on to number 3 of the budget, or the agenda rather, reports. And I'll ask CFO Mr. Creek to come to the podium to do his presentation of the staff report, please.
Thank you very much. Through the chair. So this budget presentation is about the fire department and emergency operations center. Going into, jumping ahead, question from last week, or I guess about 2.5 weeks ago now, regarding the leases that we have with a number of different properties in Metchosin. There's wondering about who covers what, what they're paying, that kind of thing. The majority of leases are paying $1, like MACA, the community house, community hall. They provide services to the district that council has previously been okay with giving basically a free lease. The only people currently paying are the owner over at Mile Zero at the school. For costs, the big ones, the day-to-day repairs and maintenance are paid for by the people that are leasing the space. The district is responsible for big capital changes, so new furnaces, air conditions, earthquake proofing a building, that kind of thing. We're responsible for that, but the wear and tear, day-to-day operations, they have to return the spaces to us as they were given. That basically covered that. I've got a few answers for questions from the Pinks that we had. One of them was about the artificial turf. So it's not actually in our budget from Metchosin. That's in the West Shore Park and Rec Society, so it's not directly paid for by us. They requisition some money, but they requisition that from Colwood, Langford, and everybody in the area. So it's not something that we have exact say over. And then from Miss McPherson, she's wondering about the honorariums from officers in the fire hall. So currently we're paying $200 a month to them to be on call for 24 hours. That's the reason it's gone from $3,000 in 2023 up to $12,000 in 2024. The forest fire revenue, we receive reimbursement from the province for wages, fuel, equipment, wear and tear, and it is actually profitable for the district. Based on, we've received $55,000 for the deployment this year against expenses of $25,000, so it has generated a little bit of revenue for us here. And basically, same thing for the training. So we do have in excess of training revenue against the expenses. So even though it shows we're over budget on the training, a lot of that's recoupable. And we generated, I'll look for it. $63,000 this year against $45,000 of expense, making roughly $18,000. And then any excess training revenue kind of goes to offset any overages that might occur, or we put that into reserve for the fire department or any other place the council seems fit. Then there's questions about EOC and the different breakdown for there. So we've got emergency measures. That covers the programs that are involved in there. So search and rescue, communications, emergency social services, neighborhood programs, that type of thing. Got one thing that says total, supposed to be total programs, expenses. That covers community promotion, the honorariums for department heads, and a few other minor things. And then minor capital equipment, got about $5,000 a year for that. It's a lot of gutter sprinklers to put on homes that they use to help extinguish forest fires and prevent the fire from spreading. That's all I could get to this afternoon anyway. But I'll try and answer more next week.
Mr. Creek, when you refer to training, is it training of our recruits or is it training with the other courses that take place over at the school?
Internal training, yeah, not for the recruits.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to the budget for 2025 or 2029. So we'll start off. We've got a few overages for 2024. Licenses and dues. There's a new one for AED services. That was a $700 cost this year, which bumped us over the budget. Insurance. So this was previously under general administration for the insurance for the fire hall. This was now reallocated into the fire department itself. So that resulted in being over budget, but again offset with the general administration. Everything kind of even out there. Vehicle fuel. So there was more calls, resulting in more usage. I've got the number on that for the next slide. First responder equipment. More equipment has been purchased, needed for the increased number of health calls that have happened. Lots of AED pads, EpiPens, that type of thing. And then emergency operations center. So again, more AED purchases. And then community promotion. So we've purchased 115 911 signs. And so these are address signs that go out on the road so that when the fire truck is coming, they can see which address it is and turn into the right driveway. One of the big impacts for this year, again, going back to our wonderful collective agreement, it's getting renewed for 2025. The annualization for the new prevention officer that was hired mid-year in 2024, and then 2% inflation for most of the non-discretionary expenses. Highlights for the year, so far, this was up till November 6th when I got the numbers. I've had 610 calls. They've spent 8,658 hours training the 40 firefighters, which includes the recruits and regular staff. And they've spent 2,000 hours on calls. So, yeah, question?
Do we know how that compares to previous years? And I'm trying to recall the report the chief provided. Like on par, a little more, a little more.
Can't say off the top of my head.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Through the chair. We're up as for call volume for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
Okay. So for the budget itself, a total increase of $61,084 from 2024. Main drivers are wages and payroll adjustment. Those things combined come up to $26,885. Honorariums increasing by $7,200. That's to afford 8 officers to be paid the $200 a month for the 24-hour coverage. And then a few other notable increases, so like telephone service for $5,000, mileage and travel for $4,500, and uniforms and clothing for $3,000. And the remainder big ones was the building and equipment maintenance and first responder equipment, which in both combined come up another $7,000. For EOC, total increase was $1,884. Throwing another $1,000 into the emergency social services program, and community promotions, another $500 to pay for some more 911 signs. So with all of that said and done, those are approved. That would result in an additional $2.02 per month on the average home, $24.25 per year. And emergency operations center is another 6 cents, totaling $2.08 per month, or $24.97. And then, as Mr. McPherson referred to, people that we don't really have a say over come to $112.31 a year for policing, e-com, West Shores, and the Greater Victoria Public Library. And then the rest of the departments so far that we've covered, so general administration, bylaw, building, planning, parks, all those come up to $56.14 or $168.45 for everybody combined. So when we look at all of these, the one thing I would like to point out is that breaking out the wages increases and payroll expense adjustment, it's for $78,894 or $31.32 a year out of that total. So it kind of would go with the non-discretionary part of it, where we can't really do anything about that adjustment, kind of stuck with it. And then hopefully we can remove e-com in the future, but let's see what the province has to say about that. So that's all I've got for this one. What kind of questions do you have?
Okay, committee, questions for Mr. Creek? Councillor Gray.
Through the chair, Mr. Creek, I'm just wondering about the question of what's called fireman insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And the proposal is to increase from $3,000 to $10,000 within the fire department budget, but I gather there's no tax increase associated with that. It's just a transfer out of the general government file?
Correct.
Great.
Well, I guess I'll correct you on that. There's going to be some kind of increase from our insurance. Like what we pay in 2025 is not what we're going to pay in 2024. So there'll be a slight increase, but not the full $7,000.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson, through you.
Yes.
Whether it's Mr. Creek or Chief Dunlop, I wonder if they could remind me again what is all covered under firefighter allowance and how that's paid out.
Yes, that would be helpful to know what's covered.
Yeah. So the firefighter allowance goes to blanket on it. Help in the back.
Duty coverage.
There.
Yes, please.
So the firefighter allowance covers two components. We have a 24-hour coverage at the fire hall. So we have two firefighters that stay at the fire hall from 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. And that is every night and every weekend day and every weekend night. And this allows for a much faster response so that people don't have to drive to the hall and then respond. So we have people at the hall to respond directly to medical calls. So they get paid $50 for that 12-hour shift. And then the other component of that is when we have mutual aid calls, when we have MVIs, anything other than a medical call, then of course that's back to the page all, and everybody who is around and available will respond to that call, because we need more than 2 people for anything bigger than an FR call. So to be clear, the duty shift, they respond to FR calls, so that not everybody responds to that. We just have the 2 people, and they get paid the $50 a night to cover beach fires, stuff like that, any of those small type calls. And then anything bigger, it's an all page, and then anyone who's available can also respond to that call as needed. For an MVI, you might need a rescue and an engine, right, depending on the severity of it. So those people also get paid a small hourly rate. It's actually calculated by the minute to respond to that call. And those rates vary from $16 to $18 an hour. So that combined is what that money is for. And if I can just add, we are very hopeful this year because now we've done this for a year now, this 24-hour coverage. We are going to make application to the Fire Underwriter Survey to be able to increase our grading, our home insurance grading for the entire municipality, which should hopefully see a significant savings in your home insurance. Now, obviously we have to apply for that and that will take some time, but we have been given some assurance that that is looking very promising for the department and for the community.
Thank you. Any other questions for the chiefs at the podium?
Thank you. Just on this, Chief, how many people in the complement that would qualify for that firefighter allowance? Like how many people can you draw on, officers and crew?
Right, so we currently have, further to the discussion around the officer corps, we currently have 5 full officers. That's the deputy chief and a captain. And then we have, sorry, I can't do the math off the top of my head, 5 lieutenants or something. Yeah, I think that's how, and myself is 9. I don't include myself in that number. So that'd be 7 officers. And we have the acting lieutenants, and they're officers who are learning how to be officers for obvious risk and liability reasons. So your question again was, sorry?
Well, it's how many crew can you draw on?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so and that varies, right? Depending on, how many we currently have. We keep a roster of 40, which includes myself and the officers. So around 30 people is what we have as far as firefighters.
Right. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. So just when you mentioned the firefighters that stay at the fire hall, so they're paid about $4 an hour? For that 12, they're paid $50 for 12 hours, about $4 an hour?
Correct.
Okay. And then my second question is, there's much talk and to do about the training expenses over budget but recoverable expense. Can you just go into that a little bit and explain that to all of us?
Sure.
Thank you.
If I can just back up in support of what our CFO was talking about, we have kind of categorized our training into 3 different components. We have our recruit training, which is approximately 4,000 hours worth of the recruit officer time, volunteers, they all come together, we train our new people for 6 months is generally what it comes down to. So that's the recruit training. We also have our regular, just fire department continual training, which is regulated by the government, how much we need to do. We should do live fire training every year, and just to keep people safe. Work safe requires that as well. So there's ongoing training for the firefighters. Then we also have the programming that we're doing over at the school right now, and those are courses that are opened up to outside agencies as well. So instead of us, for example, I have an officer that I need to get trained up. So let's say an emergency scene management course, as an example. It's 2 weekends long. So if we were to get this course in order to get our officers trained up, we would have to send them up island, over to the mainland, something like that, which costs food, travel, hotels, all that kind of thing. So years ago, we started hosting courses here. And it's become, now with that school, it's become a great asset to not only Metchosin, but to the South Island as well. So what we do there is we bring the courses here, we pay for all the logistics, and then bill that back to each of the members who attend. So that might be from Victoria or Saanich or Oak Bay or even Up Island. So that is where we're collecting not only the room rental as per the agreement, but we're recouping all the costs for any food that's served and the course fees and all that. Does that answer your question? Sorry, your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that answers my question, thank you.
Okay. So I have a question. So I appreciate that we're doing all that training because keeping it on the island is beneficial. Going to a fire school at Vermilion, which is the one in Alberta or down in Texas, is you think you got to take 6 weeks off of work. If you get an employer to allow you to do that, it costs you minimum $17,000 just for the course, and then there's modules and stuff that you got to do to follow up on that. That's if you're going into any kind of emergency type of career, specifically firefighting. So we're offering a pretty good opportunity here for training. So I do appreciate that we're doing the stuff that we are at the school and that it is starting to be some revenue generating, so hopefully we see more of that in the future. What is our retention of the recruits that we have that have the advantage of taking the training here for free from us? Do they stay 2 years, 4 years, 6 years? Do we have any kind of?
Well, I'm just actually starting to run those numbers. It depends. They're not leaving to go to other career departments, right? So I think there's a difference between, respectfully, it's not that we're hiring them to go get career jobs. Do some of them get career jobs? 100% they do. And all that does is create more engagement with the fire department here. So that's a benefit to us, as long as not everybody. And I understand the cost that we're putting into these recruits. A lot of people leave because of work. They move up island, and not firefighting work. Not everybody who comes into the fire department are going to be career firefighters, as much as they may want to be. What is the rate? I have to go back and actually run some numbers for you, but it's not a huge number. I don't even want to guesstimate at this point in time. We had 9 that completed our recruit class last year, and none of them have left. We have the year before that. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I can't think that any of those left. And are they applying? Sure. But the beauty of it is, even if they do get on a list, it's usually 2 or 3 years that they want to continue firefighting before they actually get the job. So now you've got, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. I did do a quick run. Everybody who's currently on our list right now, 50% of them have been here more than 5 years.
So the ones that are achieving their 1001, that's just a level of basic training, are they then able to go and be a POC at another department?
Sure.
As
Yep.
well?
Yeah. The thing is, though, is that they don't. I mean, we've actually had other departments come and try and pilfer them away, but they really enjoy what we have going on here. It's busy enough that keeps them interested, but it's not so busy that it takes over their life. They get great training here. Tonight, they're all meeting to go do some pump operations on their own. We don't regulate that. I mean, they need it, but it's not something that we're forcing them to do, and they're not getting paid for it. They volunteer so many hours in training just to keep their own skills up because they want to be good at what they're doing. So, and appreciate also that the cost of the recruitment does, it does cost money. We put them through the 1001 program at the JI. The reality of it is, though, they still need the training. Whether or not it's the JI, and those costs that we do through the JI are not extreme. They're I think it's under $500 for the actual 1001, for the actual online pieces. It's the live fire training that costs money. It's the hazmat training that costs money. It's, the bigger chunk pieces that actually cost more money. So it's bringing in all the cars for AutoX. Whether or not they get their 1001 certification, they still need that training. And that's the kind of the difference there. Yes, we could save a little bit of money if we didn't actually give them that tick box. However, they still need the same training if we want them to be safe out here. And that's regulated by the province as well.
So we had 9 recruits last year, and we've got 6 this year. And we have, I think the last report was 36 volunteers, upwards of 40. So how does that fluctuate, or does it?
Yeah, it does fluctuate. We actually only had, I think, 5 spots available, but there is attrition. We started with 12 last year because we don't really do the joint recruit training with Souk and East Souk. We've invited Otter Point to join us as well. They, due to just communications there, things going on in Souk, they didn't want to do a joint one last year. They weren't prepared for it. So we went ahead and were able to get, 12 great candidates. 3 of them left because they realized it was more than they could chew. It just wasn't the right thing for them, that sort of thing. They left early on. We don't commit any huge funding, we know that it takes time to decide whether or not this is the right thing for you. So it's, we were very fortunate, the 9 that are still here, they're pretty excited to be here and they're really super engaged and that's great. And we hope that they will be here for as long as possible.
Thank you. Going back to the firefighter allowance, so when our staff is here, and I'm going to call them staff because they get a small stipend, when they're here being a POC, do they also get, when there's a call, they get a call-out pay on top of that, or just the POC rate?
Just the POC rate, unless if they get 3 calls in a night, and it's a structure fire, I'm gonna add them to that list. The expectation is that they're gonna run on an average if they're lucky, 2 calls while they're here, and that's fair, right? They're only getting paid $50, they're sleeping in a not so comfortable bed, and they're here in case anything happens. And it's really been convenient having all the activities that we do on the weekends and evenings and such here, is having the firefighters here. They help out around the hall a little bit and clean up and hang hose, and so they kind of helped with that, and they do lots of training while they're here. So it's really been a great program for us.
Okay.
And most importantly, respectfully, is that it allows us as duty officers to not have to respond anywhere alone. And that's been the biggest change, is that safety in our duty officers.
Councillor Up, do you have any questions?
That's good, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Shukin?
Through you.
Yes.
Through you, Councillor Donaldson. Chief, I hate to ask you this question. You've just run through that. You draw on 36 people, and you got almost like a budget of, an on-call budget of something like $69,000. That's pretty good.
5 is, yeah.
Yeah. And you pay people $4 an hour to go do the 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. So I hate to ask this question, but I feel like I have to.
Yeah.
Cell phone charges are quite a bit over budget. Any
Cell phone charges?
Yeah.
The iPad?
No. It's been flagged in the budget here that there's an overage.
On cell phone or the actual phone?
Telephone.
The telephone.
Telephone. Yes. Sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Telephone. Thank you. So, okay. Any reason for that, or?
Yes, we've been working on that with our supplier, because I'm not sure, I don't know where we're at with it right now, quite frankly. We're working on it, because it has been an issue, and I don't understand why.
Okay.
We got rid of TELUS, we went to a voice over IP phone system, and apparently they're charging us, this was not the intent. We have 2 lines, but they're charging us for every phone. And I've just seen the sides of the building, but there's a lot of different, it's a long building. So when a phone rings on one side, we have several extensions, if you will.
Okay.
So we have them working on it, because we don't feel it's right. I mean, it was supposed to be just a TELUS to over to VoIP, and that was no cost difference.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
Roger.
So
Okay.
we are aware of that and are working on it for sure.
Okay. Sorry for the confusion.
Nope, that's all good.
Telephones. There's a difference.
Through the chair, the fire hall garbage, so you've got an increase in rubbish. So is that from the old school or the elementary school that they're not able to handle not the old heritage school, but the elementary school, there's a problem with disposal of the rubbish there, so they bring it to the fire hall? No.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a problem. Last administration, I think it was around the end of the year, last year we had a garbage bin at the old school site. Whether it was for MACA or the commercial side, I don't know, but it was out there causing a lot of problems. Just a whole bunch of garbage was being dumped there. So it was discussed that they start dumping garbage here at the fire hall. It's not locked. We've had ongoing issues with keys, and then it doesn't get dumped, and keys get dumped inside the garbage. And so anyway, we haven't had any issues with it, i.e. garbage dumped outside at all. So the idea was to double up on the garbage pickup, and that the staff over at the MACA and the school could, or the old site, whatever we're gonna call it, would bring their garbage here, which is what we've advised them. I don't know whether or not they do. I know that the cleaning gal for the commercial side, they do bring the garbage here. So outside of that, we haven't had any issues with it, but I know that is also an overage on the budget there, but it's covering the garbage for the school as well, at least on the commercial side, which she goes through there every day.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor.
I did have one, just how many unpaid hours would you think that the volunteers put in? Just a ballpark kind of idea, and maybe some examples of the unpaid hours that they do put in.
I mean, what I can tell you is that almost every day, there's probably 3 to 5 firefighters that are there from 5 o'clock until, in the evening. They come down and train together. They, hang out and watch movies together. They'll even have a poker night together. Like the camaraderie and being there that's where they want to be. It's not, which is great, because years ago, going back 20 years, everybody wanted to be there, but that's because there was a bar there. And that's no longer the case. Now they're there to make sure that their job performance reviews are being done correctly. They'll bring out a forcible entry door, and they'll just sit there and force doors, just to get their training up right. They'll have the fun days. They'll go and they'll work out in the gym. So one night they're arranging this week to go over to our training barn and do some training there on their own accord. So that's all volunteer time. They're not getting paid anything for that.
In the training barn and the other things that they're doing, like on their own time, because they're committed to it volunteering. That's all the equipment that we've invested in, of course. Is there a great deal of wear and tear or usage of things that need to be replaced, or any of that sort of stuff that's going to continue to cost us?
No, I think that, we've been fairly fortunate with our equipment replacement plan. The grant that we've been getting from the government has, been really great at replacing our hose lines. The equipment, let's face it, we don't have a ton of structure fires. So, the equipment unfortunately is there for the, worst day ever. So it doesn't get used a ton. When they're talking about tools, they're just mainly using hand tools for all their training. They pull out old hose for that type of training. We use some of our old door props that we've got, wooden doors that we get given to us or we scrounge for. So it's not anything. We've been out on Sunday and they did some rescue stuff, and that of course was with the real equipment, because they need to know how to use that real equipment as well. So I think there's a nice balance. There hasn't been anything yet that's been, destroyed due to training. If that answers your question.
Yeah, sure. That's good. Just give an idea. Councillor Gray.
Yeah, through the chair, I just want to ask some money questions.
Gotta love that.
So the firefighter allowance, and I'm just looking at some notes from last year's budget. So we added $15,000 last year to that budget, and we're being asked for their $5,000 this year. So last year when we asked about it, the explanation was, well, 958 shifts, at $50 a shift, $47,000. We're moving to $70,000 now. Is all of that the mutual aid calls?
I don't know about mutual aid calls.
So it calculates that we need, or from the numbers from the emails last year, we needed $47,900. But this year, I believe the budget will be up in the $70,000 range. So what's the difference? Why are we jumping up? When we established the new service last year, we thought we'd funded it fully, but there's a call for more money today.
So I'd have to, in all fairness, I'd like to go back and look at the numbers because I don't know exactly as far as that goes. Sure. I do know that we are up to, I think we're averaging 52 calls a month versus what we were around the 32, 34 mark. So that's an increase in calls for sure. But I'd rather to give you some accurate numbers where that funding is going before I say anything.
Sure, I'll flip you a note afterwards and we can bring it up at the next meeting. That works for the chair. The other thing I wondered about, just a kind of a maybe technical question, but the first responder equipment, last year we added $1,000, this year $3,000, and I could see that with the increase in call volume. But I'm looking at the three things that were mentioned: EpiPens, oxygen and nitrous oxide, etc. So I just had the question, and I mean it in the most positive way it could sound. Are these things being delivered by protocol or is it professional judgment? In other words, maybe I'll just go back a little bit. Protocol will control your costs and probably provide better care, and I just want curious whether or not we're following protocols.
Okay. So yes, we in I'm going to say March 2024, the province released an update and upgrade for all first responders, and that allowed us now to start taking, when we go back to the old bring back our calls, we couldn't do much, but now we can. So now we can provide epi, now we can do blood pressure, now we can do all these vitals, which significantly increases our care and baseline information for the patient moving to the hospital. And when we're on scene, an average of about 40 minutes before ambulance gets there. That's on average, sometimes less, sometimes way more. Those are vital minutes there. So yes, there was that, with that scope upgrade, which we didn't know was coming, we did purchase extra equipment and like EpiPens and such. So that's part of that increase. And the increase in calls, like we have had so many cardiac arrests this year, that's a significant cost.
Certainly.
And the Entonox, sorry to interrupt, but because we are at an EMR level for some of our staff, especially the daytime staff, the Penthrox and the Entonox are 2 painkillers, so that when we have somebody who has a severe pain, you know what it's for, can help with that pain and transport.
Yeah, I think it's been in the news, the EpiPens are very expensive. It's just they wouldn't be used very often, I don't imagine. But so is it protocol done or professional judgment? Is there protocol, people are following the patient looks like this, therefore we do that?
100%, yes.
Thank
It's
you.
all done through licensing and in accordance to protocol.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay.
Well, I
go
suppose
ahead.
I could ask another money question. The honorarium, so we increased that budget by $8,000 last year, and then this year it's another $7,200 because of staffing changes, and I'm just trying to figure that out. Is that the change from 6 officers to 8 officers? And if it is there a plan to increase that next year to 10 officers, or like what's the control of that? So last year I think we were assured, we pointed out we were shorting the budget. The calculations would have been $14,000 and we only put $12,000 in. When I highlighted that, we didn't change it. But this year, of course, we've overexpended. And now I'm just curious, what's the limit on that?
Yeah,
Where are we managing that budget?
I do need to take a look at that because I don't believe that I've asked for any.
That's the 508.
That's for next year's budget, though, right? Okay. So we have different officers have different levels. So we have a deputy chief that when I'm not there, they own the same legal authority that I do. So that person should get paid a little bit more per month, and they're watching things so that I don't have to be on shift all the time. So that is in there, and we have increased the number of officers, and that is definitely a service review if that is not something that the district wishes to do. An officer is on shift 24/7, and this is mainly so that I don't have to be on shift 24/7, and they're going out with that duty crew. So they take a shift, they rotate through on the weekends, so Friday night from 6 p.m. until Monday at 6 a.m., or if there's a holiday, then they do that holiday day as well. So they are landlocked to the district, they carry a battalion, and they respond to all calls as needed. So that's what that officer does. And so they do a rotation. The DC and I are not in that rotation, as we are the duty officer for mutual aid calls and cover and that sort of thing. So right now there are, I'm going to say 7 of them, and 3 of them are acting. So that means they're learning how to do this. So we monitor them as chiefs as well. So it's kind of a balance, getting that education up there for those officers to learn how to be good officers. And then they all take that rotation also for weeknights. So they're on duty for, I think I calculated 100 hours over the course of a month. And they get paid a $200 stipend for that.
Yeah.
And they're assuming that responsibility. So to answer your question for numbers, in a perfect world, I'd love to have 6 lieutenants, 2 captains, and a DC. But we know that that's not going to happen. So, we were just kind of discussing some numbers and what would the ideal be.
Great. Well, through the chair, probably these are the questions I can pose in writing, and then we can look at them at our next meeting and just see what is. I think that how these people are deployed would just be helpful for us to know at the board level that we're approving a new form of staffing with extra cost. As I say, we jumped at it last year for 8,000. Now there's 7,200 this year. I just would like to know if we're settling out somewhere or if it's going to just keep climbing each year.
Yeah. If I can, some years we don't have the officers to fill. Like people don't want to take on, or they don't have that level of training yet to take that on. So that's where sometimes that can fluctuate. So if it maintains at a certain level, and then if we don't need it for whatever reason, that we don't lose it,
Right.
But we can go back to that once somebody's able to fill that position. We just don't want to fill it with somebody who's not ready to take on the role, as you can imagine.
Totally. And so just maybe one more thing real quick, which is to say thanks so much for both Halloween and Remembrance Day yesterday. They were both
Thank you for your participation.
much appreciated in the community.
Chief, can you explain to us, we've got the firefighter allowance, which is the stipends for the POCs and the call-outs. How is that different with the society's allowance? And what is the society allowance? What is that invested in?
Okay, so the society, so let's go back a few years. Before we started with the gas stipend, before we started with the POC stipend, the society was given, when it was wholly volunteer as such, the society was given a much larger number than what it's given now, just to operate. It was a way to say thank you to the volunteers. They would do parties with that and whatever they would do. So that's now morphed. We've reduced that. Once we started doing the stipends, the firefighter allowance, we kept taking a little bit out of that, and we tried to reduce that. It has been reduced down to help compensate a little bit for the extra funding for that. Right now, it is used to, we fund like the Breakfast with Santa, the Halloween hot dogs, all that kind of stuff. So we fund the community events with that. Part of our engagement process with the fire department is the society has a meal together every Thursday night. So they have a budget to be able to do that, and that is drawn from the society. There's a $500 Royal Bay bursary that they give for a student there. They pay for the Shaw cable internet at the fire hall. They pay for the water at the fire hall. So these are things that they kind of give back to the community in that way.
So these, when you say they're giving back, they're using tax dollars for that. Are they fundraising to put into the society as well?
If they have a bike program, or they run a bike program, so if there's something there, but usually they contribute to various different causes as well, like whether it's the boot program or something like that. Okay. So give various funding out for that.
Okay, so this is money, this is tax dollars that is leveraged to do activities
on behalf of the society. It'll be retirement gifts for those who have been there for a long time. It might be a gift for Lance Cabin, a memorial for him at that event. So it's society things, organization giving back to different things, different people, different organizations.
Councillor Gray.
Just on that question, I wasn't sure, maybe this is a question for Mr. Creek. The notes say that the allowance is over budget, and so I can see that it's going to be more than $12,000, I guess. We reduced it last year by a couple $1,000, and I was worried about that, but it's turned out I guess we spent it anyway. But now it says due to error in billing will be corrected in 2025. So is that mean that it's been paid out, or there's some other way of paying it, or what's happening to that money? Error in billing, I guess.
Yeah, what we ended up paying was about $3,800 every quarter, rather than paying the $3,000 a quarter. That resulted in the overage, so we're at about $15,000, and that is after talking with the chief. She was like, "Nope, we should have just been paid whatever's in the budget. There's no reason to go over that." So we're correcting that going forward.
Thanks.
So I do have a question about the photocopying. Now, the photocopying and the garbage, I realize they're very small numbers. However, they're still tax dollars. Excuse me. So with the photocopying, it's my understanding, as it says here, for training materials and community handouts. It seems that, at least my experience has been with going to courses, and I'm doing more of those these days. A lot of stuff is going in, a lot of this material is no longer in the form of paper, we're going electronic. Is that something that we could do more of, so we have less paper, less staff time printing stuff off, and give links to people before they even start the course that they come prepared for?
Yeah, we still do that quite a bit. We give them that. Unfortunately, firefighters are very tactile people, and really, it's better to have a book or something in front of them. A lot of it is written information too, that they need to actually write something down. So, there is thought, if we've had the discussion of going completely iPad for everybody, and then they have to fill it in and do that. So there's potential, and we try and limit as much as we can. But a lot of the flyers and such are things that we just have to, print off for, community events and whatnot. So it is, we'll endeavor to work on it. It's just very difficult when there's just so much coming your way that's being offloaded from the province and different organizations to be able to actually have a read on things. It's being printed.
And getting back to the garbage bin, there are people who actually do drop off their domestic garbage into those bins. I'm just wondering if now that we've got 24-hour coverage, if we actually put a lock on it overnight and on weekends, because clearly we're not doing our garbage at the different buildings, that we just lock the bins up at night time and on weekends. And then we don't have to worry about losing locks and when because I know that the garbage guy comes here like at 6:30 a.m. I've seen him that early.
I mean, we certainly can at the direction of the CAO. We can do that. I just don't understand the need, because it's not like we have garbage that's piled outside and we're never full. Like it's not overwhelming at this point. So if it's keeping garbage off the streets, would that not be a good thing? I mean, we can, if that's what's directed. We can figure out another solution to it.
Councillor Gray.
I had a completely different question now about uniforms and clothing, obviously very important.
Mm-hmm.
The budget seems to have been running at about $5,000 in 2022, 2023, and now this year we're going to add, or the proposal is to add $3,000. We spent a lot last year. We sort of doubled it. We went to $10,000 last year. I wonder, was there a reason for that particular? Is it the number of new people or
Well,
something like
twofold.
that?
I'm
Which is
not
all good,
exactly
I'm just
sure,
curious.
Not exactly sure about that number, but last year we did have 12,000, or 12,000. We had 12 recruits instead of the 6.
Yeah.
And there was some money that was funded, hopefully over by the grant, that should hopefully have covered some of that overage, but maybe not 100% of it.
Thank you. So the increase then of $3,000 for this year is for having a larger number of recruits every year?
With the 911 signs, is it not the responsibility of homeowners to have their own addresses visible?
Yes, and the majority of them do pay for their own signs. There are some, however, that have not been able to. So we are working on that.
So yeah, this is $5,000. So do we advertise that these are actually for sale?
Yes.
And we're recouping how much of that?
We are moving that out of the emergency program funds so that we will be paying for it on a separate fundraising through the society instead. So that is that's this year, and moving forward, it will not be paid through them at all.
Thank you. And for the community promotion, we're doing a lot. We're now that COVID's behind us, we're able to get back together and doing your monthly service to the community with presentations on all sorts of things. How many on average attendees are we getting for that once a month when you do those?
Oh, that will vary on the topic. So on average, probably about 20. We've had as high as 115 before. So it really varies on the topic. We unfortunately haven't been able to do the past two, and just due to time and availability. So we're hoping to start fresh again in the new year.
And how many of those do we do a year?
Usually try and do 11.
Is there any way that we can do less, and maybe do them seasonally and push out prevention information into the news, as in articles?
There's all kinds of options.
Well, I'm thinking cutting costs. The budget is got several lines here that were over budget, so if we can find other ways of getting the same information out there in more creative ways, then reducing the tax dollars, and I think taxpayers will be happier as well.
Something to consider for sure.
Committee, any other questions? Mary?
I have a question. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer, but I'm wondering if at some point we were to move to a completely career, non-volunteer fire department, I would imagine that would be something that the budget would be horrendous. How many employees would we need for that?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head. For 24-hour coverage, you're looking at probably a dozen or so, depending on your shift pattern. So yeah, that would be significantly more. Even if you went to a union POT, which is also a thing now, that the volunteers could potentially go unionized, and that you're looking at for the same amount of hours, probably $400,000 a year. So we want to be able to make sure that our volunteers stay somewhat appeased on, what we're, we want them to be happy here, so that that's not the direction that they go, because that will end up costing us a great deal more. And I don't expect that that's where they're looking to go right now.
No, but it certainly is, we get a great deal from having a volunteer fire department, and with the service levels that the community has learned to expect. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gray.
Just on picking up on the mayor's point, Councillor Donaldson, I'm wondering if it would be a good idea just to clarify where we're at, to see, and through the chair, Mr. Creek, would it be possible to do a comparison, sort of a cost comparison for with peer fire departments? Get us an idea of how we're doing. I'm very impressed with what we're receiving for the money we're paying, but I think it would be helpful to benchmark a little bit here to see where are we at. Following on the question that's in the mayor's raised. Thanks.
I can give you some organizations that are similar in size, and it's respectfully to that point, if I can, to the chair, is that it's very difficult to compare organizations like East Souk and Highlands. They are, we're at that kind of in between odd mark. We're not as small as that, but we're not as big as Colwood and View Royal, right? So we're kind of at that in between. But there are certainly organizations around the province that are of similar size and makeup, and same size community as well, which is really important.
And on that, just to affirm what you're saying, in talking with mayors actually from at UBCM, very small communities, but then they have infrastructures like dams and major highways going through and that, so it's quite a lot different again, and their volunteer departments as well. So with the same model as what we have with smaller population, even like 1,200 people. Councillor Jukin.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Gray, or Councillor Donaldson. I think it'd be interesting to get that information, but how useful is it? And is it interesting? Absolutely. But is it idle interest? And I would just, right now, as I understand it, our staff are flat out. The chief, beyond all the other things that she's done, has led 2 big community celebrations just in a very short time. So I would just leave it up to our chief, our Mr. Payette, to see whether this is actually something that staff actually dedicate time to, because it's probably not a short exercise. So.
Well, I can assure you that there are at least 6 career firefighters in this community that live here and work elsewhere that may even be interested in having just a conversation over coffee with any one of us in that regard. I do have a question for Mr. Creek. Mr. Creek, in our budget, we have a budget for the fire department every year, and every year we have some sort of overages. And we have had, the chief's been very successful in getting grants, and the budget keeps going up. So the question that I keep getting from our taxpayers is, we have a budget that goes over, we have grants, but it doesn't seem to be offsetting those costs. So do you foresee for 2025 that we can actually bring that budget back into place, or not go over budget and change some of the services, or have, as well as have the grant money be able to take over, or not take over, but reduce those costs? Instead of budgets going up, grant money's coming in, there's lots of money, but we're still, taxpayers are still paying. Thank you, Chief.
Thanks. Thank you for the question, through the chair. I would, what can I say here? So all of the previous years, none of the grant revenue, none of the training revenue none of the training costs, none of the grant costs has ever been budgeted for. That was something that I took a look at when I came here, and then speaking with the chief, kind of got a wrap around on what can we actually guarantee. Like, that's one of the problems with the fire department, is that these things kind of come and go, just like the wildfire stuff. We didn't budget for that in Comox, and I'm not going to budget for that here, because I'm not hoping for any forest fires to have to fight. But for this year and going forward, like the Fire Smart grants, it's $200,000 a year. We've now budgeted for that. Like, part of the reason why the revenue went from $38,000 to $285,000. I've offset that down in minor capital expenses. So instead of being 35, went up to 235. The little guys, like the telephone expense, gonna dive into that contract and push back on that vendor in order to get that back in line with what should be expected. And then I believe getting a hold of the numbers for those on-calls and the officers and that kind of thing. If we stick to a set number, set like 5, or if we go with 8 or 6, I put in 8 for this year, just being, hey, if we fill up everybody and all those acting officers actually became full officers, this will be the budget for it. I can't imagine that, because the size of Machosen and kind of the lack of growth, that would ever need to increase beyond that, barring any kind of change of regulation from the province saying, yeah, you need more people in order to cover that kind of 24-hour shift. If that happens, that would certainly be on council to say, all right, we're not doing the 24-hour thing anymore. Let's go tell the province that we're going to get an ambulance in here and not do any of these health calls anymore. That would dramatically reduce the number of trips out and the people that are needed to be paid for on our end. I can say overall, like, because of what has been budgeted and the surpluses in other accounts, the department itself is not over budgeted for what you provided. So it's good on that end. It is just these little guys that pop up. And from year to year, you're gonna get some variances in there. Ideally, we can lower a few of them, but I can't guarantee that it's not gonna go up, especially with the cost of emergency equipment and supplies. That's not going up by 2% a year. So even me just putting in 2% is kind of a derelict of duty on that one, because I'm saying, yeah, 2%, but we know healthcare costs are not 2% a year. It's closer to kind of the construction CPI, where it's coming in at 5-8%. And we just hope to, okay, these supplies will last for a year and a half. We won't have to restock until then, and then be lower a little bit for 2026, then come back up in 27, down for 28. But I can't guarantee it won't be over budget on a few accounts, but overall we should be still with a surplus due to that extra revenue that we do generate from all the training and then the autumn wildfire. And thankfully there are what seem like almost unlimited grants. Like, I've never actually seen this much money come into a district this small from all the grants. It's more than what we received in Comox, and that's 3 times the population, with a lot more full-time firefighters. So I would think that with all that extra cash coming in, it'll hopefully offset it all. I can't promise you anything though.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Yeah, I just want to come back to the question of what I call fiscal responsibility, what Councillor Schuppen calls idle interest. It seemed that the CFO was prepared and fully ready to do a comparison of peers, and the fire chief was supporting him to do so. Are we happy with that, or do you want to discuss that more? My point, I'll just maybe point out, last year, I think I raised objections to a cut in the telephone budget of $4,900. This year, we're talking about adding $5,000. Last year, I said, are you sure you want to cut $5,000 from computers? This year, we're adding $4,000 computers. Last year, I said, gee, do we really want to cut the $2,000 to building and maintenance? This year, we're adding $4,000. So kind of like a shell game, or with the seashore here. I think it's important that we know, when we make these decisions, we know what ballpark we're in and whether it all makes sense or not. And to not do so when we have people who are fully capable to do so seems rather than the opposite of being fiscally responsible. So I just think it would guide us well to know that we're in good shape and that these increases make sense compared to the cuts we made last year. That kind of thing I think is valuable for all of us and would help our chief financial officer in terms of advising us as we go forward, and assist the fire chief as she continues to manage the circumstance along under the auspices of our CAO.
Councillor
Councillor Donaldson, thanks. What it struck me Councillor Gray was referring to was a benchmarking exercise. And if it's to be meaningful, it probably would take time and resources. So my request and my question was whether there is time and is it a priority right now for staff? Only that. I would be interested in the information myself. But again, is it something we should ask staff to do? And if it's, there's probably even a budget implication too. I might challenge the fact that I recognize that there are great people in the community that have firefighting experience, but if you're doing, again, a benchmarking experience, it's a little bit more than just personal experience that you bring in. Because what you're trying to do, as I understand it, is you're trying to do an apples to apples comparison, and that's often difficult to do. So again, if we think it's a priority, if Mr. Payette thinks we can do it as a district and it's something that would be valuable to us again, and especially staff time, open to it. So.
Yeah, thank you. And speaking of apples to apples, one thing that we have to make sure we're comparing is our jurisdiction compared to a jurisdiction that also has an ambulance bay attached to the fire department. And what we heard when we were working with the Bring Back the Calls, when we had these talks with the provinces, that they were not looking to have an ambulance in Metchosin anytime too soon. That was the message. So the level of servicing that we're giving our citizens with the fire department sort of compensates for the lack of the ambulance until the ambulance can get here. And so if we're comparing, we've got to also have that piece, and I think that'll be a little bit hard to quantify, but we'll have to compare with a volunteer fire department that is responding to calls, that want to respond to calls, that don't have an ambulance bay right there, that are taking those calls. Yeah, thank you.
The model of having ambulance stations and fire halls is a thing of the past. It used to be available. In speaking to a friend of mine who's a paramedic, he said the fact that you've got such well-trained people and doing the first responders, you're not likely to get a first ambulance bay. It's just, again, it's a thing of the past, and we would have to wait till they get here from Lee Road or wherever they are out in transit. As far as benchmarks and career department full-time 24/7 staffing compared to a volunteer department, I will leave that to our staff, the CFO, whether or not you have time, and our CAO, if it's even of value for us at this point in time. But getting back to the budget and the agenda, I asked this committee, are there any other questions for Mr. Creek? Councillor Gray.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question about the item described as wages and payroll adjustments. And it says $26,885 in brackets, including the full year wage for prevention officer. So we know the full year wage was voted last year $65,376 per annum. And is there any change to that? That was the full year wage and it was in the budget last year. I'd be happy if you took that under advisement and get back to us.
Yeah, no, I was under the impression that was not the full year. That was like a prorated portion since they weren't hiring for the full year. So me putting on the full number of hours, everything else, it was $12,000 in addition. So if 65,000 was the cap and that's it, then we could add 4% and I could drop that down quite a bit.
Thank you. And I guess I did have a different question in relation to the, well, two questions, I guess. One is that, and I appreciate the slides you had up today. The briefing note, though, had policing and e-com and other taxing authorities, and I'm thinking those really fall under, would fall under page 5, district taxation increases, in the way I look at it, as we're the ones taxing for those services now, not somebody else.
Yeah, I was trying to, sorry, through the chair. I was trying to say, we don't have a whole lot of discretion on those. So the ones on page 5, we can nitpick on, that kind of thing, but the RCMP and the e-com, so it's basically telling us, you're gonna pay us $800,000 a year, and we have to requisition for it. So we do have a police tax levy on the tax notice to show it, just like we have the West Shore Parks and Rec levy and the public library levy. So that's where just I was kind of going with it, where we don't really have a say in that number.
And through the chair, yes, and I think it was labeled well on the slide as non-discretionary.
Okay.
Whereas here, at the end last year, we sent out a tax notice that suggested policing was done by somebody else, and the idea was this year we'd clean that up and get that onto our rolls. You know, it's we're the ones taxing for it, not somebody else.
Or label it into the general municipal bill rate.
Well, like we've got here, fire department, EOC, police, you know, they're part of our budget, our responsibilities.
I can certainly do that. That's what council wants.
We had, I mean, last year the issue was that it was the transition from it being paid, you know, by us, starting that off again.
Councillor Schuman.
I personally think that's something we need to talk a little further about. Because it's not our police force. We're only taxing for 70% of it. So it's the RCMP. So it's not the Machosen Police Department. So
Councillor Gray.
The other question I had was in relation to the on the bottom of page 5, it's going through the district taxation increases, so through the chair to Mr. Creek. The increases above can be adjusted based on a few factors. And what I'm thinking of is that we're in a situation here where we heard public participation at the beginning, but we're also ourselves aware the tax increase is looking fairly sizable at this point, and it seems to me we're going to need to sharpen our pencils and live within our means. That's to say, make sure we don't have too big a tax increase. So keeping track, I think we had, you know, the volunteer, these are not big money items, but the volunteer evening as one area, perhaps whether or not we decide to have electronic counting of ballots would be another one. I think we should keep track of the discretionary items because we may need to take what do you say?
Oh, sorry.
Cut those out basically if we're going to drop back, because we've got the discretionary, we've got the things that we have to pay for, and as things get tighter, I think most of people in Machosen want to see us manage the budget as tightly as we can. So if we could think about, I'm wondering about, having seen this today, I had a few questions which will get answered another day, but we'll need to come back and see what's discretionary and what's needed and necessary. And I want to support the fire department as best we can, but we have to be careful about our inevitable tax increase here.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so let's open this up to the public then, if we're finished with our discussion. Thank you, Mr. Creed. So if there's anybody from the public who'd like to speak at the podium and give us some input or ask a question, we will endeavor to do our best to provide you with some answers, and hopefully Mr. Creek will as well. State your name and your street, please.
Thank you, Admiral Yocum, Windfall Road. Some time ago there was discussion on the compound and training tower, and that it would be removed by the end of this year. So I don't know where that plays in the budget, whether the plan is it's going to be sold, so there'll be an income, or are we going to have to haul it away so it becomes an expense, or is it simply being relocated and it remains as an asset questionable for the fire department? So I'd like to know what's happening with the compound and the training tower. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Creek, do you have any information to read on that?
Thank you. Through the chair. I don't have anything in the budget for relocating that or selling it. I think there's still some discussion over what might happen with the training tower and either moving it to a new location for training or leaving it in the same spot and further the training operations at the school. I think that's still on council's table, kind of coming forward in the next few months. But currently, nothing in the budget for it. No.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer Burgess, Duke Road. Lots of numbers, so see if I can remember which ones I'm after, because it got really busy there for a while with all the questions. And of course, it's a very sad day. I do encourage council to add their sympathies on the passing of our premier, past premier, for 5 years, and chair of the premiers of Canada for a while, and regarded, I think, nationally with incredible level of respect. And we were very privileged to have him next door to us and to come to our barbecues. And there's that double level, I think, of sympathy that can be expressed from the municipality. Thank you. And I was very pleased to be part of the call increases, the call returns, and look what we have. We have these amazing new levels now of calls that our fire department takes care of. And yes, that means a budget increase, absolutely. And the extent that the qualifications of our firefighters are developing too will mean another amount of dollars on the kind of training that we are so pleased that they can do, because we will not have an ambulance. I can't see any time in the future that we will. I urge council to consider pushing back on the it's called the ECOM 911, I believe, in the formula that's being created. I find one part of the formula is based on the size of the municipality, and I believe, are we the largest size municipality in South Island? Therefore, I find perhaps the formula used to say what we should be paying for the ECOM is skewed a bit. So it's a comment just to think about that. I believe the mayors are considering going after a question like that, and I think that would be very considerable if we can reduce that total of the ECOM. The other side that we don't talk about too much is revenue. So if we're having all of these problems and our budget's going up, are we not thinking a little bit more about revenue? So I have a couple of comments about that. One, could we ensure that we do approve that our firefighters and our fire chief can go throughout the province whenever they're called on by the province to work in other areas? We certainly now have an extended number of volunteers here to stay here and keep us safe, and I think that it's appropriate that they will be allowed to do that. So I'd like to comment on that. The other side of revenue is projected tax increase for average residential home. What is average residential home, and how is that calculated? I wonder, what is the basis used for the tax increase on average residential home? We end up in this community with a limited number of houses, which is obviously our main and only tax base, except for what we are granted by other groups. So it's interesting to note, though, that the assessment on those houses is increasing every single year. But never quite enough, I think, to meet what our budget increases are. So I think more thought could be given to where is the revenue coming from for our municipalities. You were talking about dams and industrial areas. We're never going to have those. But if this continues in this kind of debt for our residents, continues, revenue has to be seriously thought about. I don't know how. The one line I would say in the items, I think, that I'd like to point out is the building insurance has tripled. I imagine throughout the province, everything insurance-wise is tripling these days, even for us as personal homeowners. So, but I'm not quite sure why that suddenly, at the triple number, has been moved over into the fire budget, whereas before it was in, I believe, the general government budget. Does that make another, bump in our fire hall budget that really is not a bump because it was already in government, general government anyhow? So I wouldn't like it to be thought of as an increase in the budget of the fire hall. That's all. And I think that's possibly all the questions that I have today, but you know me, I will be back.
That's what Vernon said.
Yeah, the average 10% increase is something that is something to consider. So, thank you very much. Yeah.
Meryl, did you have a question?
I don't have a question, but a comment responding to the Econ 911. This is continually discussed with the mayors of the South Island. We are pushing back on it. We haven't signed on the dotted line. We will continue to ask questions. We're waiting for the new government to come in, which will be this week, and then we will know who to address our concerns to, because the rest of the province seems to be exempt from the Econ 911. It's just the municipalities of the South Island, and we want to know why. We don't understand the funding model, so we ask questions. And just on Friday, I received a letter which I've given to the CAO, and he's going to respond on what are our next steps in discussion. So that is a topic of great importance, and all of the mayors are talking about it. Every time we get together, we talk about it, and we have been for the last 6 months. And then on the question of deployment, you're absolutely correct. When our officers and our equipment, our firefighters and our equipment are deployed for firefighting, not only do the firefighters gain a great deal of knowledge and training there, we are compensated, I think, quite generously for both the equipment for the fire trucks, but also for the firefighters. I would encourage the firefighters to continue to be deployed, and it also helps with morale and confidence boosting, things that we can't really measure, and it's very hard to quantify. And so, and in terms of revenue, yeah, I think we need to have this discussion of revenue. How are we going to talk about sustainability, economic sustainability in this community? And I've talked to our new CFO about this, and I think it will be a continual discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brett Hewitt, Sabine Road. That's my first time I've been to this meeting. So far, I'm pleased with the way you guys are trying to bring the budgets down and keep the tax rates lower. As a concerned retiree soon, I don't know if my budget could handle any more high taxes, especially property taxes. But from what I hear from the fire chief, I think she's doing a great job, and continue to do that. And like I say, if you ever brought a union in for fire department, it'll be just horrendous, the cost. So I'm happy with what I've seen. You guys do a good job. Keep it up. Keep the taxes down, and you got my favor. I gotta leave now anyway.
Thank you very much.
Gary Lamb, Hackamore Drive. Just a question for the CFO. As I understand in a previous session, the average residential home is 1.3. And
Correct.
chosen, that's the value that's been set. So with that in mind, these projected tax increase for a $1.3 million value home, that's what taxpayer could expect as an increase?
Correct.
And there's additional components still to be determined and come in as well. So at this point, do you have any idea what that total projected tax increase is going to be for an average residential home?
Yeah, I can come after you. You got it there.
Okay.
Any other questions?
And then that being said, it raises the question, if someone has a home that's, say, 2.6 million, is it simply the case that they would be paying double that rate?
Roughly, yeah.
Simple math?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else in the gallery like to speak?
Leonore Davidson, 900 Speyside Lane. I only have thought, I think the fire department is doing a good job. The call-outs are more, of course they are. I would like to know if they trace what areas or anything. I understand there's more heart attacks. And the question I have is that I live in Beecher Bay, as many of you know, and we have a huge industrial site there. We have the Grizzly tugs from Vancouver coming into to the Montefico Straits. We have the huge Danish tug there as well, and it is a total industrial site. So how, may I ask, how does the fire department handle all of that? And plus there's 45 houses there, and of course the development is bankrupt too, and so with an industrial site in our midst, and it is a massive one. We're not talking about, you know, just a boat coming in there. It's there all the time. It goes out. The big one goes out there to fill in for the Grizzlies. It went out for 24 hours. It goes in, has to go in for repairs. So you think, how does our volunteer fire department, how will they cover all of that? And we all pay for it. So have we increased the amount of money we've been asking for that industrial site, or do they have their own fire department? I don't think so, because it shows that they're all in Machosen now. So that's my concern, is how are we going to pay for anything that happens there? And is the water acceptable to the fire department? I would not be surprised that you didn't even have adequate water for supplying an industrial site. And all the other buildings around there as well. So there's something that we are going to have to look at tax-wise. And as the acts change federally, provincially, and everything is downloaded now to the bottom is the municipality. And every time you turn around, we're in business, there is another act that means more money, and you can't get insurance. So that will be a problem for all of us. And usually it's about $1.1 million is the average house price in BC. So if you can find something running at 800 or 900, if it's a condo, you'd be very fortunate anywhere in British Columbia. So that's what I'd like to see. How are we going to cover this industrial site with our fire department? We're going to have to ask more from the Danish company that's running all of that, right? That's where I leave it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the gallery? Okay, so let's move on to the next part of the agenda, which is the page 9, and it is the draft finance policy for the grant and aid.
Thank you through the chair. I'm just going to answer a couple of quick questions there.
Yes, please.
So Jennifer was wondering about the average residential home calculation. So Mr. Lamb said, mentioned it was $1.3 million, and that is based on information from BC assessment. So I take the total value of the land and improvement and divide that by the total number of single family home folios that we have, and that's how we come up to the 1.3. She was wondering about the building insurance tripling. Wasn't the building insurance tripling per se? So there's, the regular part, $3,000 was for fireman insurance, so that's just the liability to cover them as human beings. And then $6,300 this year popped in for the property insurance. So that was moved from general government down into the fire department. Seems like it happened before I got here, but it seems like a proper spot for it. So I wasn't gonna rock the boat on that one and just kind of leave that as budgeted. Mr. Lamb was asking about the projected tax increase. So based on everything we have here so far, it's like roughly an 8% tax increase to that $1.3 million home. And then again, some wiggle room. We'll discuss further with council on what we can lower, remove, and then what'll end up staying. I've already seen a couple of things that I can end up changing. And then hopefully by the end of the year, once I have all the numbers, a lot of this was based on projections. So me taking into account the last 2-3 months of the year and saying, okay, if we get the same amount that we did last year into this year, we're gonna be over, therefore I need more. If we don't end up having that and it kind of evens out, we can lower that a little bit more. And then Ms. Davidson, so about Beecher Bay, our revenue did go up by $7,000 this year, which is about 20% of what we were charging to Beecher Bay. I haven't seen that actual contract. I don't know what it includes, if it has been bumped up because of the additional properties, because of the industrial park, but certainly something we can look at. I think that's about it. Yeah. So, on to grants and aid. So this is, Councillor Donaldson brought this up as our previous grant and aid policy was about a page long and kind of lacked a lot of detail. There's a lot of wiggle room for grants, and this is kind of shoring it up, make it a little easier for everybody to understand, and takes a little bit of stress off of council on choosing who gets approved and who doesn't. So we've gone with the idea of having 2 categories for grants, so one for capital grants and aid, and one for one-time grants and aid. Capital, again, you'd be looking at grants for capital in relation to a society that owns or is leasing district-owned property. So say MACA or the community hall or community house. And then for one-time grants, more along the line of they're holding an event in the community that's a benefit to everybody here. They would fill in an application, submit that, and we would approve it based on how many people they're helping, and if it matches with our strategic priorities that council has set, and as long as they're not doubling up on some service that's already provided. So we've created a scorecard based on for Ms. Donaldson, along with the review of other municipalities that have had larger grant and aid policies. For this purpose, staff, in particular I, would end up reviewing grant applications that come in based on the criteria in the scorecard. As long as they meet those, I'll put in a score for it. I'll submit that to council. Council can then review it. I'm only going to pass along the ones that actually can meet the eligibility requirements for it. So you have to be a registered society. If you want more than $1,000, then we're not funding any deficits from the previous year. We're not canceling out any services that are already provided by us or another organization. And then with that, give it to you guys, and you can debate here on what should be approved or not. The deadline's gonna be March 50th or 30th, one of the two. And then hopefully get the checks cut April, May, kind of depending on how long it takes to debate whether or not it happens. There was a proposal to set a cap, so say 75% of the total grant aid budget. It would be authorized at the initial March 31st deadline. I didn't want to put you, like hamstring you into a specific amount in case you got a really good application and that was going to take up 100% of the budget. So I'm going to leave that open. Something to keep in the back of your mind though, when looking through them, it's like, hey, maybe we should save a little bit of money for ones that pop up later on in the year, say July, October, November, maybe something for Christmas time, that kind of thing. And I can kind of leave it at that. One thing is that the current budget set in the 2025 through 2029 is $5,000 for grants and aid. Apparently this was $10,000 previously. It was lowered because of the RCMP costs that were coming on board. Didn't know how much that was going to impact everybody. So something that to consider if you want to increase that a little bit more. We are on the low end of grants and aid. I was on a conference with a number of CFOs around the province for their grants and aid, and we're doing like 0.01% of our property taxes. Other people are 1%, 5%. So there's a lot of wiggle room, but people are sent out quite a bit. Some people don't send out as much. Kind of depends on how you're feeling. But as long as it kind of meets a need and is supporting the community, something to consider. Questions?
Councillor Shukin.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson, through you. So, Mr. Creek, you would do the evaluation for us, and then you would forward the ones that sort of cross that bar to us.
Correct. Yeah.
And would you bring them to us with sort of the grade, or would it just be after that it would be up to us to do the selection, if you will?
Through the chair. So I would provide my little scorecard with it. I would just have it, my report would be ranked people who had, 99 out of 100 down to like 10 out of 100.
Okay.
And then leave it up to the council to choose which ones they actually want to do. You can certainly rescore it. I don't think that I'm all knowing or anything like that, but I have zero bias. I don't live here. I don't really know anybody. So I'm not going to be skewed either way. I'm just going to totally base it on criteria that meets your strategic priorities, and after reviewing their financial information, make sure they need the funds and they can't go seek it somewhere else.
In years past, we have provided funding to organizations that are outside of Metchosin, and we've done that because they fit the ethics of both the council and the community. So, for example, there was a funding request from, I forget the exact name of it, but it was basically the crisis line in Metchosin. So, and I think we all agreed that that was a worthy initiative. I think just even in your review of process and requirements procedures, criteria number 1 could cover that. For the benefit of residents of Metchosin to help meet the goals and strategic initiatives of the district. So it could be there, but I just should flag that in times past we have extended grants to organizations outside of Metchosin. So, yeah.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll keep that in mind. So if I get one that seems, this seems like a really good idea, it's not actually based here, it's not going to impact the 5,000 people, maybe I'll shoot out a quick email to everybody like, hey, do you want me to throw this in at the back of the report? It doesn't quite meet the eligibility criteria that we've set, but something to possibly look at. I'm not going to be the gatekeeper on all of this, right? I'm just going to get through most of the fluff if we get any bad ones.
Great.
Give me the good ones.
Thank you.
Councillor Gray.
Through the chair, I wondered at the bottom of page 2 of the document, page 10 of the agenda package, it says application for one-time grants and aid over $1,000 must meet the requirements, be from a registered organization with proof of registration. Up above, the capital was available to registered organization, but also to societies in good standing. And I wondered, was that meant to exclude anybody, or was that meant to be registered organizations or societies?
Well, that would be or societies. Yeah, so
Great.
as long as they're a registered group that actually has up-to-date financial statements, they're not flagged by the CRA for anything wrong.
Correct.
Business mentions.
Thank you. It's just the language was used in a different way above. And then I wondered about demonstrating every effort was made to earn or acquire funding from other sources prior to applying for a municipal grant. That was one of the eligibility requirements, and I don't know if that's what people do, or if what happens is they say, well, this is where we're at this year, and they submit an application hoping we might fill a hole or plug a hole. So I just wondered what that would be like for organizations, if that's different than what we've been doing. Maybe others know better than I.
Through the chair. So it's actually in the current application form chosen that it's like, hey, here's a 1 through 5 on the application. Like list who you've asked for money from, if they've been approved when you asked for it. So it's nothing brand new. It's just being actually written down on paper that we would prefer you to seek funding from elsewhere, because again, generally the federal government and the provincial government, they get to go into debt, unlike us.
Yeah.
We don't get to print money or anything like that. So ideally, you go seek funding from them first before you come to us and have to take a dollar out of everybody's pocket here.
I think my same comment would go to the applicant must demonstrate financial need, and I think at a certain point it's a question of seeing looking at their financial picture, I think is what we're talking about.
Yeah, correct.
Thank you. The other thing I wondered, it's a small amount of money, and so while we might hold back a certain percentage of grant for another time of year, it seems like a small amount of money to be doing that with. So just a thought as you're looking at it.
Through the chair, that's correct. Yeah, the $5,000 is not a whole lot of money nowadays, especially when you get a dozen or so requests. And pretty much anybody's going to be asking $4,000 because maybe someone will ask for $100 for a basket, something like that. But it's pretty hard to parse that out and still provide help to everybody that needs it.
So through the chair, perhaps that depends on the applicants of the year, and you can take a look at that as we see them coming forward. I'm not objecting to the idea, just that it's won't be easy to implement necessarily. My last comment would be to offer my thanks for putting the work in to get this done. This is something that I think will be a big help to us.
Mayor Little?
Thank you. Through the chair, I like the point of the best practices would be to limit the approved grants to the original deadline to 75%. Because last year we did have a request mid-year, I think twice. One of them was from the Seniors Association at the West Shore Parks and Rec. They wanted a basket, I think it was $85 or $100, but we didn't have any money left in our grant and aid. So I'd like to keep some in the eventuality that something will come up during that year.
When I was doing the research for this earlier this year, and I looked at a lot of the communities around us on the Lower Island as well as in the interior, it was interesting to learn what different people do. And as Mr. Creek has said, we're really like the 0.01%, but it is what we're affording. And we've had people that we've never even heard of before come and ask for money. They make the rounds. They've made it clear to make the rounds. When people like the senior center, other seniors do go there, it would have been great to help them out, but we weren't able to. One of our neighboring municipalities, View Royal, their complete grant and aid comes from their funds from the casino. So if they're getting $80,000, it all goes into their grant and aid. It's just a different way of doing things. It's not what we would do. And I'm not sure if it was them, but there was another one that did hold back 20%. I think at the end of the day, we need to realize that if we have $5,000 there and people come and ask, we don't have to give all of it away. It may be that maybe some of them just don't fit by how Mr. Creek put this together. And if somebody does come up throughout the year, like the Wounded Warriors was another one that was a very good cause. I mean, our community, there's community members that help in different ways with that, but us as a council aren't able to. This sort of flushes out some of that. So I don't know if we need to put something aside or not, but I think we need to be wise in when we're looking at this, that if 5 people come and we've got them all asking for $1,000, we don't necessarily have to give all that $5,000 away. So this sort of helps us sort through that a little bit differently with priorities. Councillor Ray?
Did you need a recommendation that this go to council, a motion to that effect?
So there's 2 ways of looking at it, that we can refer it to staff for changes, or we can, if it's good to go, then we can send it to council for approval. So that's up to this committee. What would you like to do?
I did have one other question.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was just, I wondered through the chair, Mr. Creakin, if, I'm not sure we know the answer to this one, but what would be best practices for the district in terms of, we're subsidizing a number of community groups, which I appreciate, it's great. And then I was learning, of course, through the variety of presentations at council, that those organizations then make grants to other groups. And so it's kind of like the district is making grants to other groups through these organizations. And I wondered, is there anything in the community charter elsewhere that, are we permitted to do that? We're kind of transferring money to somebody else to transfer this to a third party. And I just didn't know if that's all good or how we should approach it.
So through the chair, there's nothing in the community charter that prevents you providing low-cost rent, and then that organization and using the money that they've saved to provide grants to somebody else. It's more of the optics of how that looks. So if you want to take more control of it, certainly ways that we could wrangle that. One thought was, it's like, okay, what if we started charging them rent, and then that turned into our grant and aid budget, much like them taking the casino money, turning that into their grant and aid budget. We could increase the rent and say, hey, it's like, instead of you being able to hand out grants because you don't pay any rent, we're going to charge you rent, and we're going to take that money and give it back to the community in another way. Just as one example. But
Thank you.
And I think I read somewhere in here about the some of the registered societies, they have bylaws and constitutions. I did belong to, I still do, a society where they were restricted. They were not allowed to give money to other organizations. So, and that happened when we had the big floods in 2021. And so, what they ended up doing is, instead of accepting money from an agency that was doing some rental work with them, they just asked the agency to actually, on behalf of them, donate the money, not even come through their books, because they weren't able to do that. So just, again, the way CRA works and their bylaws. So I'm glad that you've got that part in there as well, that they have some restrictions. Mayor Lily?
I'd like to make a motion that the Finance Committee approve the Finance Grant and Aid Policy F100.05.
Moved by Mayor Little, second by...
I'm wondering if we, just formality-wise, I think it's a recommendation?
to go to council for approval.
Yeah, so I second.
Okay, second. Any further discussion, committee? Comments? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Pass. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Creek, for your work.
Thanks.
Okay. Now on to Councillor's update. When I put together my Councillor's update, I try my best not to write a big full-on novel. And so in an effort to be brief, I think I left out a few things. I just want to address what I try to do is highlight some things that have happened in the last month that I think that it's important to the taxpayers. And in this particular Councillor update, well, it's been a couple months since I've done one. So The Greater Victoria Library Board, as you know, is one of those non-discretionary entities that we are paying a lot of money out to. So people say, well, you know, we're paying a lot of money, what do we get in return? And so I tried to push out some of the information on Facebook of topics that might be of interest to our community. Recently, I went to a youth event at City Centre Park, and it was for all sorts of young people, different services. And I talked to a young librarian there, and with the idea that there's a lot of online services that the library does, I thought, well, that might help a lot of our residents that live here. There's something called Hoopla and OneDrive, and it's not just putting your books on hold, it's being able to download things. So I've asked them if they'd be interested in partnering up with CERT to be able to do a presentation for not just seniors, but people in our community. So these are the kinds of things that I do as a representative of this council in my appointed role on things like the library board. So West Shore Parks and Recreation, we are one of 5 owners, and there's a lot of, the staff is amazing. The CAO and I just went to a owners meeting. Some of the information is repetitious for me, but I was there in my role as acting mayor this last month. So some of the things that have come up there was artificial turf field, triangle baseball field upgrades, youth programming. The artificial turf, what I've put in my report here, struck a nerve with some of the residents, and so I immediately looked at what is it that I put that got people upset. And so, no, we're not putting artificial turf in the Chosen, nor are we putting it down at the rec center. So for those of you that may not have read it, basically what I said here was artificial turf requires a high initial investment of $3.1 million, but offers lower annual maintenance costs compared to natural grass. Estimated annual net revenues would cover turf replacement every 12 to 15 years, though they would not recover the initial capital cost. Now, where this came from is the West Shore Parks and Recreation tries to use the grounds. There's about 150 acres. It's completely maxed out with services. And so we try to be multiple use of the facility. So we have different tenants and organizations that come in and use it. So like we have soccer clubs and lacrosse clubs and baseball. And so the fields are not always great to play on for, say, soccer. And so some of them have had to go to other turf fields in the West Shore. So they approached us and said, have we considered that? And the staff hadn't really done a cost analysis. So this is what this was a cost analysis. And they brought it to us for a discussion. So my response to the residents, and there was a number of them that emailed me and phoned, and so this was my response. The excerpt you read was part of a larger report from West Shore Parks and Recreation, for which I serve as the Chosen's appointed council representative. As one of 5 owners of the West Shore Parks and Recreation properties, Chosen holds a vested interest in decisions affecting the facility. My councilor's update includes insights from the board meetings I attend, where West Shore staff recently presented a cost analysis following a tenant inquiry regarding the potential use of artificial turf fields. This analysis compared the cost of using turf with the cost of natural grass fields during times they are unusable. Like you, I expressed concerns about not only the cost, but also the significant environmental impact associated with producing, installing, maintaining, and eventually disposing of artificial turf. The board members, in agreement with the West Shore staff on this particular meeting, concluded that artificial turf will not replace natural grass fields on the West Shore property. So to put that aside. So I was really happy that people actually are reading what I put, but it kind of caught me off guard a bit. On to the next one with the Triangle Baseball League. They're growing in numbers with their youth, specifically their older teens, mid to older teens, and so they need a bigger field. They have Luxton, which is one field that they maintain all the time, but with bigger fields because they're hitting the ball further and so on and so forth. The dimensions of these fields is there aren't many of them around, and because the sport is growing, they want to accommodate. Where we have a field like this on West Shore is beyond the soccer pitch, but in order for us to expand it, we would then interfere with the picnic shelter, there's a jogging trail, and there's another baseball field. They share the one baseball field with an adult softball club, which is different from baseball. The cost of that is significant, and it only is one user group, and we wanted to have multiple use year-round, so baseball has a season. So the answer was, unlike the turf was an absolute no, with the baseball, we looked at alternatives. So what we're going to go back to that organization with is having it's a pitch that you can, like the pitcher. The pitching mound is different for the two different sports. So we're going to offer that to them, a portable pitching mound, so they can still do the work that they do with their particular sport. And that way we're still engaging with multiple patrons' usages of the property. And then the last one was the youth program funding. And so as we learned at the council meeting last week, that RCMP is pulling out of some of the youth services that they had offered, MIST being one of them. This particular youth program, it's called On the Shore, or The Shore. It's grown in popularity. There's an art component, there's culture, there's sports, there's all sorts of different things. And so it was presented to us about 6 different levels, and they're all cost related to whatever service. And so we opted to go for one of the higher ones, which involves pizza, because food is always a good thing to have with kids, and it's a communal thing. What we did explore with that is, instead of us paying that out as taxpayers, we thought, hey, maybe we should get some businesses on board and see if they'll sponsor it. So this is the kind of work that West Shore staff does. They're looking for grants, they're looking at different ways to keep the costs down. As we've heard tonight, wages, collective agreements, and insurances. Wages, insurance this year, that is what's really skyrocketed across the board everywhere I go. Library was the same thing, 4 and 5% wage increases. So these are different things that we work on and my colleagues as well at the table, and the different organizations they're involved in. So that was part of what that councillor's update is. Moving on just very quickly, under the agricultural portfolio, I did put out a couple of news articles this year on promoting the roadside trails and how to be a successful roadside trail business owner, with, I think there's like 5 little bullets that's in our bylaw on how to set that up so it's safe, you're off the street, and you're not encroaching on public land or anything, and traffic can get by. And then there was an interesting new design in roadside stands. If you're not making your own, there is actually somebody in Chosen that was approached and has created one. So I approached him, I asked him, can I do a little feature on you, as this was my second or third installment. And I got an email back from him just recently saying, he said, yeah, absolutely, gave me some pictures. And we didn't talk about costs or anything. I just wanted to know if I could put his contact information. Now he says people want it for parcel drop-offs. So it's just versatile. It's not really a roadside stand when it becomes something else. But again, it's supporting our community and doing some different innovative things. It's very small scale economic viability that's happening, but who knows where it will go to. So those are just some of the things that I've been doing, and then some volunteering on the side. Did a poppy campaign with the Legion this year. That was very interesting and a lot of fun, right along with the RCMP. Recently organized the Remembrance Day March, and I have to say, this was one of the better years, I think. I mean, the weather was great, but I've been doing this now since before 2010, when I was involved with scouting. I only know that because I went into my book and there was a letter to council about closing roads and whatnot. And years ago approached, the fire department, could we use the kitchen? And because it used to just be scouts. And they would do their little walk down to the cenotaph, and then it grew and grew, and more people got involved. And then, you know, my husband came to council asking for the road closure, and then the fire department was taking care of traffic. So everybody helps in this community. It's absolutely fantastic. Now I just phone up the staff, and somebody make sure that somebody from RCMP Red Surge is there, and then another staff member will make sure that there's an article that goes in, not an article, but just the announcement into the Gazette, into the news, and out onto the marquee. I did that one myself the other day, and I had to get some pipers in. It's very collaborative, and it's a proud moment when your community actually rallies around and helps out. You know, it's really great that everybody helps in that regard. And Mr. Henry always says the emceeing. We never know until the last minute. 7 o'clock Sunday night, I have people still saying, "Oh, I want to be part of this and that." So I say, "Here you go, Tom. Do your magic." And so we do the best with our itinerary. It's a little different every year. It's just not a lot of pomp and pageantry like the other places. We're very small, quaint, and humble, but it was a pretty special day. So with everything that's going on in the world and the losses that we're experiencing, even in our community and not too far from our community, I'm proud to say that I live here and that I'm Canadian. So thank you everybody for the responses for on my councillor's update. And then we have some things that I'm not sure I can answer all of the questions in here, but I would thank Mrs. Boover for sending her letter, Mr. Clark, and Mrs. McPherson. Mr. Clark had, Mrs. Boover had commended Mr. Clark and really would like for us to do our best to keep our income and expenses balanced and sustainable. I wasn't able to reach her. I did try. Mr. Clark had some comments about the fire hall, which is not on our agenda at the moment, but a quick look into the material that I had, which there is a great big binder actually behind the counter that the chief put together a couple of years ago that has all the studies. So back in April and May of 2022, so not this council, but previous council just before us, there were studies that were commissioned to RISEC geotechnical. Those were for soil conditions underneath the building to see if it would be built post-disaster requirement of the BC Building Code. And so that foundation is, resistant to seismic response and that sort of thing. Another one was Skyline Engineering, and again, that was more of a visible, it was, what do we call it, analysis or report that was given to us. And again, there were some things there about seismic. The 1965 seismic design requirements were first introduced to the National Building Code of Canada, but this apparatus bay of ours was built in 1993, so to the standard of the day and a little bit beyond. So we may have to do more in the future, we don't know yet. Again, we had asbestos testing, we had hazardous material survey, and then recently an RFP going out to a feasibility study. All this is to say that this is information gathering, so we know which direction we should go in. So it is not a complete waste of time to do this sort of thing. There are reasons why we are doing this. Clearly the last council thought so as well. Otherwise they would never have commissioned these studies to be done. So I'm hoping I'm answering most of his questions on that. I believe that Mr. Creek has answered probably most of Mrs. McPherson's questions. I will leave it to you to follow through with that, please, because some of them are technical and some of them were quite personal, so I don't wish to discuss personal stuff in the chambers this evening. Any questions from the committee on or comments on the Hanks? Councillor Gray?
Yeah, just a comment on the Hank, particularly the one from Mr. Clark.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I see there is final bullet, I think is exactly what Mr. Creek is bringing us through, which is looking at going through our budget as we are, then getting a look at the priorities and knocking back where we are building, whichever direction we decide to go. And so I think our process should achieve the ends that the Clark's looking for there. And the other comments are more in relation to the fire hall, and perhaps we should bring this correspondence back when we're dealing with that issue. I did have a question, and I guess it would go to the CEO through the chair, but is the fire hall, I think at the last meeting or the meeting before we heard the fire hall roof was leaking. Was under the impression it had been repaired. We have just to hear whether it's leaking now or if it's repaired.
CEO, could you?
I don't know.
It had a Band-Aid put on it, and it is, when it rains and the winds are in the right direction, we still get leaks. It's not the massive leak that we had before we had that repaired, but we still replace our tiles every time it rains heavily.
Thanks so much.
So there will be a fire hall steering committee meeting coming up. They're just deciding on a date. This is a public meeting, so it's open to the public. So if people have questions or they want to come and listen to what's being discussed, I invite you to participate in that. It's very interesting, and there's a lot to learn. There are no secrets. Okay, so seeing no other questions, committee, I'd like to call for an adjournment, please. Moved by Mayor Little, seconded by Councillor F. All in favor? Adjourned. Thank you.